You're watching the MVP IT Pro podcast, the only podcast where you enter as an IT Pro and leave an MVP. This podcast is brought to you by Altaro Software, makers of Altaro VM Backup and Five9, Mission Control for your Microsoft Cloud. And now, your hosts, Andy Syrewicze and Rob Corradini. Hey everyone, you're watching the MVP IT Pro podcast, the only podcast where you enter an IT Pro and leave an MVP. My name is Andy Syrewicze, technical evangelist with Altaro Software, and as always, I've got my good friend Rob Corradini here. How's it going?
Hey, how are you? And
hey,
I'm
good.
from Five9.
That's right, you are. You're wearing the shirt today, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I've got the whole Altaro logo going on, but my microphone's covering up there, so...
No worries.
Right.
We know where you're from.
Yeah, it's not hard to figure out what with the logo on the background or anything, right? It's pretty easy to figure it out. So. Well, hey, we've got a great show on the docket for today, don't we, Rob? We've got a number of different things we're talking about. We're going to be talking about some news-related items. Basically some stuff that's come up recently. We're going to be talking about those 4 guides in regards to Microsoft Azure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some awesome guides that just got released, or some that have gotten released but more visibility to. And then we're going to get into some of the don't quit your own day job scenario. And then we're essentially going to talk a little bit about the Vijay interview before we get into anything else. So.
Yeah, that was a great interview. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that and to share the interview too. Vijay is the principal group program manager with the Azure Stack Team, right? I think I got that right.
Yeah, that's correct. I know they have these titles.
Right. So I'm excited to talk about that one a little bit later and share the interview as well too. So, well, I guess we might as well go right into the news stuff, right? Let's talk about.
Absolutely.
I'm calling this section Newsflash.
Newsflash,
Even
absolutely.
though it's not like breaking news or anything, but still, that's what I'm calling the section here. So.
All right. Well, Newsflash it is.
Well, I'm thinking of it. You know what we should do is we should put a vote out to what we should name each section. That's
that would
an
be
idea
pretty
while
cool.
I'm thinking of it.
maybe we can do it over Twitter. That might work too.
Right. There we go.
Exactly.
Anyway, let's talk about these 4 guides here. So, I think you've mentioned earlier that they've all been released within the last 2 or 3 months here. I think, right? Do you kind of want to tell us what they are and what they're about, real quick?
Yeah, sure. So Azure and the Microsoft team have come out with some good guides that really help you with your Azure experience, your hybrid experience, and you help essentially with your cloud experience. First of all, they have the Agile Virtual Data Center Guide, Lift and Shift Guide. That's a really great guide to help you how you bring your physical infrastructure and all these kind of scenarios into your Azure platform. So it's a great guide. That one actually was released this month. There's also an actual Azure Virtual Data Center Guide, and that's really about governance around Azure. What you need to do with isolation and security, and really how you're doing trust within Azure. Then another guide that they just came out with a second edition of, because obviously DevOps is a very big thing within Azure, is the Developer's Guide to Microsoft Azure second edition. So, and it goes through the day-to-day common app design scenarios. And then the other guide that came out the end of December, which I like a lot, is the Azure Strategy and Implementation Guide. And this is where you really are getting into understanding and building that narrative, and helping you building out that planning also. Because you have to go through and really build a narrative for your team and your upper management, also build out a plan and map your, how you're going to do this specifically out. So this guide right here gives you a lot of great tips and tactics around that.
So to me, if I look at those, and I'm looking at the Azure Strategy and Implementation Guide, if I am an internal IT pro at an organization, and let's say I'm having a hard time getting my team on board with this whole idea of the public cloud in Azure, it seems like that would be my go-to guide for, like you said, starting to build that narrative to try and get your team on board, and more importantly, upper management, right, who ultimately makes the decision, to get them on board with Azure and why businesses need to start adopting, if not a holistic 100% cloud route, but that hybrid route, which I think is where a
hybrid or even multi-cloud. I mean, I'm seeing all these different scenarios out now. Absolutely.
I think the other one that kind of catches my eye, and if I put my old infrastructure hat back on here, the lift and shift guide seems really interesting to me because, I spent 10, 11 years working for a service provider and doing a lot of migrations during that time. And lift and shift was always, you'd have the ones that went really well, but then you would have the ones that would go absolutely south on you too, So it's always nice to have a guide, especially when we're dealing with, technologies that are as new as Azure. And it seems like every week there's a new tool. That's an exaggeration, but it feels like every week there's a new tool.
Well, to be honest with you, I think there is a new tool every week because when I log in, there's always a little, hey, this is new at the top.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that seems like it'd be a good guide, especially for the infrastructure folks out there. So, and then Azure, that virtual data center one, I kind of wish they'd give it a little bit more descriptive of a title, but you said it's kind of centered around governance.
Correct. It's around governance. I've only gotten about a quarter way through it, but it's centered around governance, isolation, and security around your Azure infrastructure.
Gotcha. Well, important stuff. That might be a good one to bundle up with the strategy and implementation guide to give that to upper management, right?
Yep, exactly. And that's all those guides really help you with that narrative, So.
Yeah, definitely. So what we'll do is we'll be sure to include links to all 4 of those guides in the comment section below this video. So we'll be sure to get that out there for you. So all of you watching this today can take a look at those, and hopefully they'll help you in your day-to-day activities. So with that, shall we move on to our next segment here, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I'm calling it "Don't Quit Your Day Job," because again, we love doing this podcast, but it doesn't always pay the bills, right? So,
yep.
Basically this comes down to what have we been working on lately? And this could be personal IT projects. This could be, work IT projects. And Rob, I'll go ahead and let you go first. I hear you've been working on some very interesting WordPress stuff.
And I did mention it last time. So I finally got WordPress up and running on my Ubuntu instance. Got all my database tables imported. Had a few issues. Initially, when I was deploying WordPress, I was actually going to deploy it as a PaaS application, but quickly found out some weird bugs when you're importing from a traditional WordPress database into a PaaS WordPress database. So, I thought, and I said, you know what? I should control the whole thing, so I have complete control. I have the ability to bump up resources and add additional things underneath the hood. So finally, I got the site up and running, and I'm in the process of actually transferring my domain over to Azure as the start of authority, which takes a couple days.
Right.
And once that happens, I'm fully in Azure with my blog. What's great about that is, one day when I'm hitting 100,000 users, I can dream on that. I can do a real nice scale out, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Or you just turn on auto scale, right? And you just not have to worry about it anymore.
Exactly. So if I'm hitting those numbers, Andy and I will be sitting in a different podcast.
Right. Exactly. We'll be doing this podcast from a beach somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Well, hey, so overall, how would you say that experience was getting your domain into Azure? I asked not only for the folks that are listening, but I have a selfish reason for asking too, and that I have a personal blog that's been out there for a while. I haven't really done much with it lately, but there's a tick on my to-do list that says move blog hosting to Azure.
Well, there's a couple. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So there are a couple ways. Obviously, if you have an existing one and you have control at the registrant level, you can actually go there and put your sort of authorities there. Azure will allow you to create the domain. It wants you to put a text record in to verify that you really own the domain. This is standard stuff. And then essentially you, once you've done that and you point your start of authorities there, now obviously Azure's taking over. Just make sure all your DNS entries are, in place, matching the old start of authority. So that's one way to bring them in. Another way is called delegation, where you can delegate a subdomain a portion of your domain over to Azure.
Right.
That just requires your existing DNS to point to that. Or you can buy a new domain where essentially Microsoft is the registrant. Right now, Microsoft doesn't support transferring domains over to them directly.
Okay.
Only buying domains right now. I'm assuming that's a functionality for transferring that's going to come down the pipe down the line. So for me, I moved it over to a provider. I had it on some no-name provider, and I moved it and consolidated it typically under the one that I use for everything else. So it's not an intuitive thing with the Azure. I will say on the Azure DNS, I still think they have a little thing of maturity to do to it. Also, when you're building out SRV records, I will say I did notice one thing. It doesn't give you the full capabilities of all the things you can put in the SRV records. So again,
Interesting.
It needs maturity.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, to me, I would really like to see that transfer option come down the pipeline. And I'd be surprised if it wasn't something that they've talked about doing already. So hopefully, we'll see it in the next, half year or whatever. Because if I'm hosting my website or my web app inside of Azure, I would almost want them to be, the holder of that domain as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. I mean, my previous one was a hoster, which I know they're pretty predominant, but I decided to go to and right now I'm delegating, but I'm moving it over to a very well-known provider that has to be started with essentially the registrant, which is GoDaddy. We all know GoDaddy is extremely predominant and very large and redundant. So from there, I'm essentially naming the start of authorities at Microsoft that they assign to you. So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with that, I'll go ahead and talk about what I've been working on recently. And
I love this.
What I title Windows Insider Preview Woes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't do it on a production machine. But go ahead.
Well, see, I'm demoing a lot of features that are still technically in preview. So writing content around stuff that's still technically in preview. So I need a machine that has the technical previews, has the insider previews installed on it, right? So, I've run into some interesting issues with this new desktop machine I've built. I designed it to be kind of a video editing rig because I do a lot of that type of stuff, and I installed stock Windows 10 on there. The release candidates. I got it fully up to date, and then I'm like, okay, I need these insider preview features. I went and enabled the insider preview. And I went with the slow ring because, yes, I need some of these features, but I need a little bit of stability too, right?
I'm like, slow ring. I would have just gone the full boat, but go ahead.
Well, anyway, what's slow ring? And the update, the build install just kept failing over and over and over. I'm like, all right. So I started digging into this.
Just an FYI, if you don't know what slow and fast ring are, they're essentially release schedules. Slow ring tend to be more stable builds of Windows 10. Fast ring are pretty much coming right hot off the press.
Yeah, just about. I mean, I think in the last couple of days, I think I've seen announcements for a couple of fast ring builds here, like 3 within the last week and a half. So definitely they mean what they mean, right? Slow and fast. So
and I actually run them too, but I actually just run them in a VM and keep an eye on that way. Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm troubleshooting these build install issues, and I'm reading some forum posts, and that issue was fixed in fast. So I'm like, all right, I'll just switch over to the fast ring. Same issue. Like, okay. So I tinkered with it and tinkered with it and tinkered with it. Not finding a whole lot of good, solid, concrete information out there. And so finally what I ended up doing is I went and downloaded the build 17074 Insider Preview ISO, did a fresh install with that, and then upgraded to the latest release of the Insider Preview at the time. And then in the last couple of days, we had 17120 and 17123 come out in the fast ring. And now my builds are failing to install again with the same issue. So I started digging into that, and I've been outside of I've been out of the endpoint management game for quite a while now. My thing is for the last probably 6-7 years has always been infrastructure and everything associated with it. So I haven't done a lot of endpoint management in the Windows 10 era. But I did learn through my troubleshooting that there are all kinds of Windows installer and Windows upgrade logs that are out there that I was never aware of.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using Git Windows, Git Windows upgrade log, the PowerShell command all these years. That doesn't pull everything. That's a very small subset of the log information. So if you drill down into C Windows Panther, there's a bunch of log files in there. There's also a bunch of log files in the hidden C Windows ~BT folder. Just a ton of log files. And there is a great web page I found that actually explains where all those log files are and in what situations they get generated. So, of course, there's a different location for, okay, the update applied, and it's the first reboot. If it failed there, the logs are in this location. If it failed on the second reboot, the logs are in this location. I mean, just all this stuff that, to me, isn't intuitive. But once you find this document, it's really helpful in helping to track down.
That's funny that you say that. It's the same thing in the SCCM world, and you have to when you're pushing out operating systems until you fully image that OS. The logs sit one place and then once the OS is in play, they sit in another place. Right. But similar, yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting, eye-opening thing for me. Like I said, again, not being in that endpoint management world like I used to be 6-7 years ago. So that's kind of what I've been working on. I'll be sure to post the link to that webpage, that Microsoft Docs link that I found earlier, because I found that really useful. So,
and I'll be sure not to run it in production.
Right. That's probably the number one advice I have for myself, that I'm just choosing to ignore, because I know I shouldn't be running Insider Preview in production here. But like I said, I need to be creating content and talking about these Insider Preview features. So I guess that's where I'm at. So, well, anyway, hey,
awesome.
We've got an interview with Vijay that we have to we've got to get out to people here.
Yes. So this interview was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
We got to talk a lot about Azure Stack and what its current iteration is and the road mapping of where Azure Stack is. Just to kind of give a quick scenario or a quick definition of Azure Stack, Azure Stack is essentially Microsoft's on-prem solution of Azure. And I hate to say it that way because it's not a fully replacement for on-prem.
Right.
But it's essentially your journey to the hybrid cloud.
Right.
And we really got to get into a lot of those topics around what are use case scenarios, etc. And it was great to actually meet Vijay. I had seen Vijay once speak at a conference a couple of years ago, and it was great to actually see him speak, actually do an individual interview with him. Andy, anything else that kind of shot out at you?
I think the big thing for me is he fundamentally answered the question of use case.
Yes.
See, to me, with Azure Stack, the question was always centered around use case. Because obviously an implementation as big as Azure Stack, which minimum 4 nodes, and the entry point is quite large, right? The question always centered around which kind of organizations we're going to use it. And he really, really covered that inside of the interview. Should we go take a look at that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's go, Andy.
Let's take a look. Well, hey everyone, Andy and Rob here, and we're joined today by...
You always forget, yeah. Right.
I said Rob, didn't I?
All right, go ahead.
We're joined by Vijay Tewari. How's it going?
Good, how are you, Andy?
Very good, very good. Hey, I want to say thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
He's one of my biggest fans.
Hey.
Oh, God, because of who he is.
This is the jokester over here.
Yeah, all right.
Well, hey, Vijay, why don't you tell us about what you do for Microsoft and the great technology that you work on here as part of your role?
Sure. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. So my name is Vijay Tewari, and I run the team in Microsoft that focuses on the Azure Stack infrastructure. And that includes working on the platform architecture. So my team and myself focus on working with the hardware ecosystem, working with the partners to actually co-engineer the hardware solutions.
A lot of the OEMs.
That's exactly right. And then we also work with them, we actually work to develop the software that you use to operate Azure Stack. How do you deploy it?
Okay.
How do you manage it? How do you monitor it? All those facets of the operational life cycle of Azure Stack are developed by my team and myself.
Okay. That's got to be a really interesting role, and I mean that's some fantastic new emerging technology that's out there, taking what you guys have learned with public Azure and now kind of, I say, shrinking it down to not cloud scale, but a scale that private businesses, exactly, it's consumable by private businesses and organizations outside of Microsoft. So. Did you want to start with the use case question?
I want to understand use case scenarios. I mean, is Azure Stack something where if they just want to replace on-prem, would that be is that something, or what are the use cases around Azure Stack?
That's a good question, and we get asked that question quite a bit, right? And I think so. We've sort of had a lot of good conversation with customers and identified sort of 3 major use cases, if you will, for Azure Stack. So the first thing you got to recognize is that Azure Stack is an extension of Azure, right? And it's a hybrid cloud solution. So what that means is that you ideally benefit from using the solution if you're using it as an augmentation to your Azure strategy. That does not mean that we don't support a completely disconnected scenario. We absolutely support that as well. But you still need to be thinking of it in the context of the cloud paradigm that you want to establish in your organization.
I see.
And so we sort of come across 3 distinct use patterns that we have with customers. The first and foremost that we have are a set of customers who want to use Azure Stack at the edge or in completely disconnected scenarios.
Okay.
Right. So think of
shipping or.
That's a great example. So you have a ship which potentially has a large number of sensors on board, right? And you want to be able to process the data from the sensors using all kinds of new technologies or new cloud solutions, cloud technologies, right? And so by placing an Azure Stack instance on the ship or a submarine, you then have this opportunity of being able to do cloud processing on the data that's being connected there, right? Another example of this would be defense and government scenarios, right? Where you are in a remote location, you want to establish, some productivity suite, or you have some IoT sensors that are feeding information to that organization. So that's a great example of where Azure Stack is also an option. And you also have scenarios, where you may have some connectivity to the back end of Azure. You can actually use Azure Stack to do some filtering and processing of data before you actually send that up into Azure. So you have that kind of local edge processing at the deep end as well. So that's sort of the first use case that we see. The second use case that we have come across is for customers, who have to meet a variety of different regulatory regimes, if you will, right? A classic example of this is that there are certain countries who have laws which says that their country's citizens' data, whether it pertains to financial or healthcare, cannot leave the geographic boundaries of that country.
Yeah, it was Germany.
Germany is a big one, yeah.
Well, actually, there are other countries as well, not just Germany.
I was talking Turkey. I don't know if you had plans to go there.
So we actually, and you're right. So there are lots of countries which actually have this ability to, or who have passed laws on saying that this is where the data needs to be. And so if Azure is not available in that data in that geography, then you have the option either by yourself as an enterprise or as a service provider where you can actually host Azure Stack and provide cloud-style computing capabilities to your customers in that geography while still abiding by the
data sovereignty.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are other examples, where there are, multinational companies which are actually building cloud solutions, right? And these cloud solutions, under normal circumstances, are hosted in Azure. So there are examples, where these companies would then actually develop the application in Azure, deploy it in Azure for the customers who can use it in Azure. But for those geographies where they actually have to have, local data, then they can take the same application because of the consistency that exists between Azure and Azure Stack. And then deploy the same application onto Azure Stack. So they benefit from sort of building the application once, deploying it on any platform or rather any location, and they also benefit from the fact that it's the same application. So their users are accustomed to using the same application, they don't have to be retrained, right?
Yeah, so run an application
Right.
anywhere, anytime.
And the third use case we have seen is, there are companies who have large amounts of data that they potentially want to use a cloud application model. So we call it as cloud application models on premises, right? So there are customers who want to use the modern style computing technologies, NoSQL, tables, blobs, queues, right?
That brings a good point so what do you do for companies that are like financial services that maybe want to anonymize their data or something? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, and that's a good good idea, because what happens with financial companies is they have this need to be able to say that, look, when I send this data to anything outside of my premise, this data needs to be anonymized. And then if you think of Azure Stack as an augmentation, as an edge strategy, then you can collect the data locally, and then you can actually scrub the data on an Azure Stack instance, do some local processing, and send the anonymized data up into Azure, either through ExpressRoute or something of that sort, which then allows this organization to actually benefit from the power of Azure while still complying with the regulatory requirements that they have for the data that they have.
Wow.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, there's one other use case that I've heard people talking about in the industry, and that is from a service provider perspective. Now, I come from a service provider background. Could you see Azure Stack being used by a service provider to provide private hosted cloud to their end customers? So instead of the service provider taking the time to spin up, 2 DCs, a file server, and RDS, could you see it being used for that service provider to allow their end customers who have their own IT staff to log into their Azure Stack instance, provision what they need, and just bill them at the end of the month for that usage? Would that be a valid use case for Azure Stack, do you think?
Yes, but and absolutely, we have a lot. In fact, a dominant part of our customer base right now are service providers, and what they're really doing right now is deploying Azure Stack instances in a multi-tenanted way, so that their customers can then actually log into the Azure Stack portal and actually consume resources.
Okay.
However, it is still a hybrid cloud solution, because all these service providers, they are also Azure CSPs, or cloud solution providers. So what they offer to these customers is the ability to actually deploy these applications in Azure Stack, but also consume resources from Azure. So it really allows a rich palette of capabilities that can be offered to their end customers, who can self-serve themselves and actually deploy a variety of different assets on Azure Stack or Azure.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a really compelling use case, because really, in my mind, I think of the public footprint of Azure itself, but then extending that to more regional data centers like service providers, because I know a lot of end customers that I've talked to that, sure, they trust the cloud somewhat, but they still want to be able to walk into a building
They can talk
and
to the individual.
all my stuff is running in that rack right there, and I think that really helps kind of address that. It addresses that need, and it kind of helps those people get on board with cloud, right?
And my feedback would be that this is a great use case, but the service providers should really look at this as an opportunity to provide additional value over and above just saying that you host a simple Azure Stack instance, right? You talked about the proximity to the customer, so either offering managed services or offering migration services, something that adds value over and above just trying to say I offer Azure services is probably a good idea for the service providers to go after.
Right. Well, cool. That kind of leads into another part that I want to talk to about Azure Stack, and that is entry cost.
That's exactly what I understand.
So I talked to a lot of MSPs. Most of them, I would say, fall into the category of targeting customers in the SMB or the mid-market space. There's not many of them that touch that enterprise area. And they look at the entry cost of Azure Stack, and a lot of them, they fall out of their chair. Now, there's a reason why it costs what it does. I was wondering if you could address that concern a little bit to try and help the industry kind of understand why it costs what it does.
Sure. So, the first, let me just break down what the entry costs really are, right? So, there are two elements when you acquire Azure Stack. The first element is that you need to acquire the integrated system from a hardware provider. Like we have multiple hardware partners: Cisco, Dell, HP, Lenovo, Workman, right, and Huawei, which is coming fairly shortly, right? And the objective would, so you have to pay the hardware partner for actually getting the full integrated system, right? And then the second part is what you pay for the services that you actually, or the software that you actually run on top. Now, from a software perspective, we offer a pay-as-you-go scheme. So what that means is that if you have an Azure Stack instance deployed, but have not deployed any workloads on it, you won't get any bill. You'll only get a bill when you actually consume Azure services on top of Azure Stack, right? Now, from a hardware perspective, right, you have a couple of different options, right? A lot of these hardware partners are actually offering fairly innovative leasing schemes, for one, where you can actually lease the hardware so it offsets the initial capital investment. The second option is that some hardware partners also offer hardware on a pay-as-you-go basis. So then you can actually defray the initial capital risk of getting into a business like this, and go down this path, right? The other thing I would point out is that, since you specifically asked managed service providers, right? Since Azure Stack is inherently a multi-tenanted environment, right? You can provide, rather than providing a dedicated instance to per customer, you can actually use this in a multi-tenanted way and then defray the risk across multiple customers that you actually onboard to your environment. So there are multiple ways to sort of plan your business around a successful Azure Stack venture. Right, and we've seen a lot of partners actually take that route and go down that successfully.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, you know what? For me to wrap this up a little bit, what's next for Azure Stack? What do we are looking forward to that's going to be groundbreaking?
Well, Azure Stack, is Azure's, and so we'll continue to evolve Azure Stack. And just like Azure, we plan in 6 monthly cycles and deliver capabilities in 6 month cycles, right? So in the next 6 months, generally up to the middle of this calendar year, we got a whole bunch of stuff coming. In fact, something that just went out since today is the 6th of March. We actually released our February update just yesterday, which had a whole bunch of features already in there. But we're really focusing on the platform side. We are focusing on scale. So we're going to increase the vertical scale in a single scale unit, as well as expanding to have multiple scale units, right? We are adding some significant capabilities. So your resiliency in terms of being able to resolve incidents yourself, being able to monitor and react to incidents that happen on Azure Stack is going to be much better. We are offering a whole bunch of Azure capabilities like managed disks. We are going to be offering, templates for Kubernetes and Service Fabric, right?
Sky's the limit.
Right, that's a lot.
So you got to really think of, just keeping Azure Stack updated, and we release an update every month, and each one of those updates contains a variety of things ranging from new features to security fixes to bug fixes, right? And so we respond to customer feedback. Customers should go to the user voice, give feedback there, and we take a look at what's coming in from customers. And rather than having a 2-year roadmap, which becomes very difficult to react to when customers change what they are looking for, we sort of go in 6 month increments. So look for what customers are doing and then change our direction based on how the customer base is actually reacting and using the product. So that's kind of like an interesting approach that we've taken, and that's really what the cloud is all about, being able to react in an incremental fashion to what customers are asking for.
Yeah. Great. We really appreciate your time, Vijay, coming here and meeting with us. As you know, we're at the MVP Summit, and we can't really say too much during what we're doing in the sessions, but it's great that you at least gave us a little sneak peek inside of what's going on in Azure Stack.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks, Andy. But just by the way, our roadmap is not confidential. It's actually on the web. If you go to the Azure roadmap site and search for Azure Stack, you'll find that stuff there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's interesting. Even though there's no cameras everywhere.
Right. We'll definitely be sure to include that link as part of this video.
Absolutely.
So people can go and look. And
really. And there's one other thing that I do want to mention is the Azure Stack sizing calculator.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. I'll put a link in the show notes on that. And we can probably talk about that another time. But we could spend an entire episode on that.
Yeah, easy. And so, I also wanted to say thanks for your time and thanks for addressing those questions, especially over use case and pricing, because I think those are probably two of the most common questions that I get as an MVP when we're talking about Azure Stack out in the wild. So definitely thanks for taking the time to kind of help us with that. So
thanks, Andy. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, hey, we're back, Rob. That was, like you said earlier, that was a fantastic interview, right? Vijay is just a great guy to talk to, and that That was a great interview. Can't say that enough.
Yeah, and we caught him right after the session. So he was fresh Azure Stack in the mind after he spoke to all the MVPs.
Right.
So it was great. So the one thing like we mentioned before is use cases. I mean, you were just talking about it previously.
Yep.
That he really went into those use cases. And so you could really understand where the use case is for Azure Stack.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, if I put my MSP hat back on, I mean, looking at that solution for MSPs is really interesting to me because now I can, if I'm an MSP, instead of having to spin up and support all of this infrastructure for my customers, I can say, hey, Mr. Customer, here's the portal to my hosted Azure Stack instance. Just go use it. And then you, the MSP, collect the bill, collect the cash at the end of the month, right? I mean, it just makes things so much easier. I really love that use case for Azure Stack, and I'm glad we were able to talk about that. That was really cool.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, we got to wrap this up because we're going a little long. So,
yep.
Well, Andy, you want to say your goodbyes, or you want me to?
Well, sure, I can say my goodbyes, I want to thank everyone for watching, and thank you, Rob, for taking the time to, as always, come on and be co-host with me here. We love doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And I also want to mention to all the viewers, you can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and a little birdie told me today that we may be getting audio versions of this podcast out on iTunes and maybe some other mediums out there as well.
SoundCloud, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That way, if you want to listen to us talk while you're driving into work in the morning or something. So plenty of viewership options coming. And again, just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch us, and we hope you find the show valuable and helpful, and we look forward to continue, doing it month after month here. So,
yeah.
Well, I think that covers it, Rob. You have anything to add?
I'm out of here.
Sounds good. Well, again, you've been watching the MVP IT Pro podcast, the only podcast where you enter an IT Pro and leave an MVP. Thanks for watching.